Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Unusually, we have another, obviously no camera, voice only episode today, and unusually, we'll be going into some unfamiliar territory, such as the grim potential for World War III. We'll also be going into some other grim things, but more familiar things, including propaganda, groupthink, the New Age replacement of Christianity. So it's quite a wide-ranging episode, really, but it's not all grim. We'll have a bit about France, and again, Catholic zombies back from the dead in France. Hope in Christ, our hope in Christ. Yes, I'm going to attempt a small meditation on the way of the heart, as described by Valentin Tomberg. Now, it's something of a stopgap episode. I actually have two other episodes in the works. There's a monster 3-hour episode on the New Age coming up soon that I announced at the end of last year, and there's another one that I'm trying to finally pull together after a long time. Both are coming soon, but I thought that I would just issue this stopgap and take the opportunity to wish my listeners a blessed new year. Now, I say blessed new year because I'm not quite sure how appropriate it is to say happy new year with what seem to me very dark clouds on the horizon. But however happy or unhappy this year is, we can still take, and we must take, courage, inspiration from the light of Christ. But to refer to what I mean by dark clouds, well, I mean on several fronts. I'm sure, like all of you, I'm gravely, concerned with this war. A war that we are told repeatedly that Russia is losing, Russia is losing, Russia is losing. I've been watching the mainstream media this year about this, and this is one thing that has really borne itself in on me. First we're told that the Russian economy is bound to collapse. We're told again and again and again that Russia is running out of ammunition. We're told again and again and again that Russia is being forced to retreat. Again and again and again, we are being told that Russia is losing.
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Alright, silly joke there that some of you may remember from the Princess Bride film, but anyway, we're told Russia is losing, Russia is losing, Russia is losing. Well, if Russia is losing, we don't need to keep throwing billions into this. We don't need the latest round of announcements that the UK is now going to send tanks, France is now going to send tanks, and Germany, as I'm speaking, is under pressure to announce that it is going to up its armaments, tanks and so on, in this conflict. When a war is being lost, you don't need to keep pouring more and more and more into it. Now, no one, please, should read into this that I'm adopting a pro-Russian stance on this channel. No, I am well aware that innocent Ukrainians are being killed by Russia. I'm aware that massive numbers of Ukrainians are suffering in other ways, being massively made homeless and displaced by Russia. My comment here is to do with propaganda. You don't need to be pro-Russia to see that the West has powerful propaganda at work. And, this is not to say that Russia does not have powerful propaganda at work. I'm sure it does have powerful propaganda, and it may be far worse than the NATO propaganda. I wouldn't know. I do not read Russian. At any rate, I have to say that my confidence in the Western mainstream media has reached an all-time low, and that's saying something. Again, it doesn't mean that I'm in any doubt that Russia is bringing enormous and unspeakable suffering to the Ukrainian people. But it does mean that I feel a need to read as widely as possible. So I try to read the whole spectrum, from the mainstream to people on the left of the mainstream, the so-called far left, to people on the right of the mainstream, the so-called far right. I try to read in two languages, English and French, because I can, and I think it's important to go beyond the Anglosphere. I want to encourage wide reading. But in the course of this, I've come across an article by a French left-wing intellectual, Emmanuel Todd, who has suggested that we may be seeing the commencement of World War III. And at the crux of Todd's argument is that what we're seeing now is an existential struggle for the survival of the systems of Russia and the West, where neither side can afford to lose, which is why we have escalation. Now, I normally refrain commenting on these things, partly because I'm far less informed than people like Emmanuel Todd. I feel like the internet is, YouTube is filled with too many voices of too many people who don't know what they're talking about, and I don't really want to join them. I'd rather really stay with things where, ladies and gentlemen, I do believe I know what I'm talking about, at least to an extent. But for whatever little it's worth, Emmanuel Todd's analysis helps me understand what I've been witnessing, what we've all been witnessing this year, with the incredible amount of money and arms going into this, where NATO is suddenly concerned with protecting these people, these innocent people, where all kinds of innocence over the decades have been undefended. That NATO is going all out to win this war. Everything I'm seeing has confirmed for me Emmanuel Todd's analysis of an existential struggle for survival that shows no signs of stopping, but only escalating. This is why I'm speaking about the need to read around. As I've also been saying on previous episodes, I'm very concerned about groupthink. And that groupthink can be, because you're just tuned in to the mainstream media, but it could also be that you're tuned in to your traditional Catholic set of channels, or your conservative set of channels, or your left-wing set of channels, or your New Age set of channels. Groupthink is everywhere. And it seems to me very important to read widely. So, I've startled some people on this channel before, saying that I've read a lot of Noam Chomsky over the years, and I detest much that Noam Chomsky stands for. But nonetheless, his books have really helped me see the mendacity of the mainstream media, for example. And I thought I'd just say something brief about this left-wing intellectual, Emmanuel Todd, because I've read one of his books as well. In fact, I believe I'm right in saying that Emmanuel Todd is the man who coined the word I've been using on this channel, Catholic zombie. So Emmanuel Todd is a left-wing French intellectual who detests Catholic values. Why is he speaking about Catholic zombies? Because he sees a political phenomenon in France where Catholicism seems back from the dead, at least as a political influence. So French Catholics now speak about this in terms of a badge of honor. I'm a Catholic zombie, but they owe that, as far as I can recollect, to Emmanuel Todd. So that's just a little aside on the value of reading widely and not getting caught in any one channel of potential groupthink. But to come back to what I mean by dark clouds gathering on the horizon, For someone like myself, it's not simply this war, although this war, with all its potential for escalation, now we're sending in the tanks. Who knows what we'll be sending in next to defeat the supposedly losing enemy? No, it's obviously, for someone like myself, it's about much more than these kinds of things. It seems to me, as I say on the channel all the time, that we have a more and more and more aggressive capitalism and materialism destroying all sorts of human values. And the church that we would hope would be standing up to these things, well, over this time, we've faced the loss of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. One of the things that Benedict XVI has said over the years that has really impressed me, just a little soundbite really, but he stressed the importance that the Catholic Church should not become a clone of Protestantism. And yet we now face, it seems, in the Vatican, all kinds of forces that would exactly like to turn the Catholic Church into a clone of Protestantism, or indeed, even, dare I say it, a kind of clone of secular liberalism. So, this is not a very cheery New Year's greeting to you, ladies and gentlemen. And, I actually think I'd be failing you as a Christian and as a Catholic if I tried to manufacture some New Age cheer. Why do I say failing you as a Christian and a Catholic? I say that because one of the things that I'm trying to say on this channel is that in my journey from the New Age to the Catholic mystery, I've realized something. I've realized that the Catholic mystery brings one into a greater confrontation with reality than anything I ever found in my 20 years as a New Ager. I've got an episode on this channel. It's one of the most important ones, in fact, called How Catholicism Made Me Human. And what I'm actually implying in that episode is that during all my years as a New Ager, there was something that was comparatively less human to me. And we're going to be bringing this out, I hope, in the big monster episode on the New Age, 3-hour or so episode coming soon. So we won't take too long with it now. But for example, I believe I go into there that Alice Bailey, who stands at the very root of the New Age movement, was able to celebrate the dropping of the atomic bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima as a great event in the history of humankind. She speaks about it in the most incredible terms as a new age of power in the history of the human race. I believe, if I recall correctly, she's even suggesting that it's this great event, greatest event in thousands of years, apparently greater than the life, death, and resurrection of Christ our Lord. You can only have that kind of inhuman kind of perspective if you're doing what the Alice Bailey books preach, which is a very, very, very deeply detached view of life. Similarly, there was a while I was into A Course in Miracles, and A Course in Miracles literally says that sin and evil have no reality. And A Course in Miracles is actually encouraging people not to worry about sin and evil. Love is the only reality for the Course in Miracles, which is supposedly channeled from Jesus. And this Jesus, in inverted commas, tells us that only love is real. And over the years, I noticed with all kinds of disciples of the Course in Miracles, again, this kind of strangely inhuman tendency. There's a story here that comes to mind. I hesitate to tell you it, but I will. Many years ago, I knew someone who had been a disciple of the Course for many years, and something came to his attention, and it was that a man had been anally violated with a pickaxe. And this person, student of the Course in Miracles, said, well, the victim of the assault. And then he corrected himself with something like saying, well, I shouldn't say victim. because there are no such things as victims. The Course in Miracles preaches a kind of attitude that literally denies the reality of a world of sin and suffering and victims. This also leads to dehumanizing tendencies within the New Age movement. I'm not saying that all of the New Age movement is like this. No blanket black and white terms here, ladies and gentlemen. The New Age has a lot of psychotherapy in it that will foster a certain kind of confrontation with human realities, but it is a distinct tendency. And when I became a Catholic, what it did was to slowly open my heart more and more and more to both the joy and the horror of this world. Confront what is going on in this world. In that same episode that I was speaking about how Catholicism made me human, this was after the abortion referendum in Ireland that permitted abortion for the first time by law in Ireland a few years back. And I say on that video that it hurt my heart very deeply. And I'm very glad it hurt my heart. If I had had false cheer and sort of said, well, let's not worry about this, things are looking up, that would have been a profoundly unchristian response. And another point I make in that video, in Ireland, at the time of this victory, we had the tragic situation of young people dancing in the streets, literally dancing in the streets at this development. A development that would have horrified their ancestors that I dare to say are more human, at least in certain respects. I say I dare to say because, again, I don't want to be black and white. I am aware of a kind of pro-choice person in Ireland who gritted their teeth, voted to kill the unborn. I severely disagree with their perspective, which I think is delusional. But if they weren't dancing in the streets, it's really the dancing in the streets that I'm speaking about in terms of a loss of humanity. Be that as it may, I'm painfully conscious that as a New Ager, all those years ago, I might not have been dancing in the streets, but it would not have affected me the way it did now. It is thanks to the Catholic mystery, thanks to the sacraments of the Church opening my heart, that it has affected me. And I don't want to tarry too long on the New Age, but I will just throw this in as well. Another key characteristic of the New Age, beyond this kind of serene detachment or disbelief in sin, evil, and hell, is this outrageous optimism. The Alice Bailey books, the Theosophical books, are filled with this unbelievable optimism about a dawning age of Aquarius. Where the lines of that old song Aquarius, where there'll be the mind's true liberation, and peace will guide the planets and love will steer the stars. The Theosophical books aren't quite that outrageous, but there's a message. Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. All is progress, onwards and upwards. But the real theme here, ladies and gentlemen, is not about the New Age. It's about the opening of the heart through the Catholic mystery and the confrontation with the fact that we do live in a world of sin, evil. Hell exists, hell on earth, hell beyond this earth. These are realities. And if we begin confronting these realities, we won't be dancing in the streets. Some people might be hearing me and thinking that I'm giving up hope, counseling despair or depression. I'm not. In terms of this war, I am open to the idea that Emmanuel Todd is right, that we could be in the opening stages of World War III, because we now see an existential struggle where neither side can afford to give in. At the same time, we do live in a world of miracles. we do live in a world of Christ, Our Lady, heavenly hosts of angels, and inspired human beings working and moving in this world. So who knows what will happen? No, I'm not counseling despair or depression or giving up hope. Encouraging, I would call it an attitude that embraces tears where tears are appropriate. So, Our Lady wept at La Salette. Our Lord wept at the tomb of Lazarus. Weeping for the world is important. I'd like to bring in something here that's another way of maybe really making the point I'm trying to get at here. It's a point that I try to make very much in my books, including my most recent book, The Gentle Traditionalist Returns. And those of you who know my books know that these so-called novels that I've written, The Gentle Traditionalist, are not really hugely heavy on storyline. They're mainly dialogues, as you would find in a play, where you just read it through blocks of text. This character speaks, that character speaks, this character speaks. Dialogues between different aspects of my psyche, really, I suppose, because the characters represent different parts of me, really. And I'd like to draw attention to a dialogue between a character called Anna. Anna has been a New Ager. She's been to Findhorn. She's lived at Findhorn like I did, but she's a Catholic now, and she's weeping for the world. Mark my words, it's important for what I want to say later on. Anna is confronting the horror of the world, and it brings her tears. And I'm just going to read just a very short few lines here that encapsulate something I want to say in this episode. So Anna, and she's referring to the world situation. It's bad, isn't it? Really, really bad. And then GT, the Gentle Traditionalist, responds to her. There are words from a great Eastern saint of the Church, Silouan the Athonite. I recommend you ponder them in your heart. Anna, tell me, please. GT, keep your head in hell and do not despair. And GT goes on to say, real Christianity does not enter into New Age flights of fancy. Carrying the cross means confronting reality, not phony positive thinking. And hell is part of reality, including hell on earth. Keep your head in hell and do not despair. Silouan, the Athonite Orthodox monk at Mount Athos, I regret to say that my knowledge of our Eastern brethren in the Church, Eastern Orthodoxy, is really rather limited. But a friend of mine, a dear old friend of mine who knows far more about Orthodoxy than I do, quoted that line to me once from Silouan, and it really hit home. It hit home very, very deeply. And at the time, because I know so little of Orthodoxy, I did not even know that according to Silouan, he said that he actually heard this line from Christ. Keep your head in hell, but do not despair. Or sometimes rendered, keep your mind in hell, which I take it to means confronting the reality of hell in this world, whether it's the hell of killing the unborn, whether it's the hell of this war, whether it's many other kinds of hell, both in this world and beyond this world. We need to face this and not despair, which is something easier said than done. I'm coming to that in a moment. About how do we do this? How do we keep facing the reality of hell and not despairing? But yeah, I just want to say now, hit me very deeply. There's a whole chapter in the book called Keep Your Head in Hell. I think I'm going to call this episode Keep Your Head in Hell. Indeed, the epigram of the book, so the epigram, as most of you will know, is the little phrase that authors often take from somewhere else and place right at the front of the book to sort of say what the book is about. You see, many authors do this, and I do it as well. And my original epigram for the book was indeed, "Keep your head in hell, but do not despair." But I changed the epigram at the last moment before going to press, or close to the last moment. And therein hangs a tale, and it's also relevant to what I want to say. So I'm going to tell you, what the new epigram is. The new epigram inserted at the last minute is from St. Paul to the Corinthians, "When I am weak, then I am strong." So why did I choose that? Well, I've been telling you about how Anna is weeping for the world. And an early reader of the book gave me an impression of Anna. I can't remember how he put it exactly, but I think maybe he found her a little bit weak, or, maybe whiny or wimpish, and maybe that's the fault of my poor writing. I don't know. But my point is that was the very last impression that I wanted to give of Anna, or that I had of Anna, because Anna, for me, is the strongest character in the book, well, along with GT, the Gentle Traditionalist. She may be weeping, but she's strong because she's able to confront reality. And through the Catholic mystery, her confronting of reality is growing deeper and deeper and deeper. She's been a New Ager in the past, living at Findhorn, but now she is meeting the horror of this world. And yes, weeping. Our Lady, the weeping Virgin of La Salette, was not weak. The weeping Virgin of La Salette was seeing the horror of the world. To weep is not to be weak. That really is a message that I wanted to convey in this book through Anna. And so when I got this kind of feedback, possibly I made some changes because my writing, maybe it was the fault of my writing, but I also switched the epigram of the book to "When I am weak, then I am strong." Because real strength, not a phony strength, not a phony, puffed up strength where we sort of ignore the horror of this world with positive thinking, but a real strength lies in knowing that the world can overwhelm us, that we are very small without Christ, that we need Christ and his church. This is real Christianity, and it's one of the things that I was trying to convey in the book, is the difference between this kind of attitude and the New Age, which so often is about a kind of phony, puffed up strength, how you can be powerful and so on and so forth, or phony feel-good fantasies that come out of the New Age or come out of Hollywood movies. Interestingly enough, they both come from California. I come from California. Viewers of this channel know I sometimes call myself an Englishman from Los Angeles. That's a digression. I've been meditating recently a lot on the New Age roots in California. But that's for another time. Right now, when I am weak, then I am strong. We need to have the courage and the strength to know we are weak. We need to know that reality is not this fluffy, feel-good fantasy, and confront it. This is what real Christianity is. Now, before moving on, I want to say something else, because all of this may sound rather grim and dour. I don't want to be confused with a Calvinist or a Puritan. I'd like to tell you that before I sat down to record this, we've had this beautiful, pristine fall of snow where I live in the north of Ireland, and I went out for a walk and I was rejoicing in the snow. I love the snow. And at one point, a little robin hopped close to me, and I love these little birds. My heart leapt with joy seeing this robin in the snow. I'm all for feel good if the heart is responding to beauty, whether it's the beauty of a pristine snowscape that evokes so much peace renewing the world, or it's the beauty of God's creatures, I'm all for feel good. I'm not in favor of feel good as we stare into the other reality that exists on this planet, the fallen reality of darkness and evil. So, yes, we live in a world of two realities, side by side. Beauty and goodness and holiness on one side, and incredible darkness on the other side. And when I speak about goodness and beauty, I don't just mean beautiful landscapes, snowscapes, little robins hopping, along in this beautiful Irish landscape. No, I mean that across this world, human beings are engaged in countless acts of cooperation, of creativity, of mercy, of self-sacrifice, of prayer that reaches up to the angels and to God. Every day, at least 100,000 priests in the Catholic Church, to say nothing of the Orthodox Church, are bringing Christ's body and blood into the world. We live in a world of miracles, and we must never forget that. But on the other hand, as the words of the Salve Regina tell us, we are living in a world where we are mourning and weeping in this valley of tears. At least we are mourning and weeping in this valley of tears if we are keeping our heads in hell, if we are facing the reality of the other world. Because in the other world, there is this war where, yes, innocent Ukrainians, including, children, are being killed. Of course, there are countless other wars and conflicts on the planet. There's an underworld with things like the mafia, all kinds of violence, sex trafficking, drugs. There's worlds of starvation going on out there. Both worlds exist side by side. And if we're not going to kind of retreat into fantasy and keep our hearts open, then it is indeed blessed to mourn and to weep. As the second Beatitude tells us, blessed are they that mourn. And I'm just going to insert a few words now from Valentin Tomberg, who is commenting on the Beatitudes in his book Covenant of the Heart, now called Lazarus Come Forth. And Tomberg writes, "They that mourn or bear sorrow neither strive after a pain-free existence, nor turn away from pain, but bear it with acceptance. For the fullness of existence, life's true richness, does not consist solely in health and happiness, but in an ever-expanding range of joy and sorrow. And the broader the range, the richer life becomes." And Tomberg's just said something there, very briefly, that he says throughout his writings, that the Christian way is a way where the heart broadens out, grows, deepens, and develops, and the result is a greater capacity to feel joy, but a greater capacity to feel sorrow and to bear the sorrow of this world. And we're not going to go into Tomberg too much now, but as an aside, as I was moving from the New Age and as the Catholic sacraments, were transforming my heart, Tomberg was freeing my mind in some way and helping point me to a world away from New Age fantasy, a world where I could really begin to bear the sorrow of this world better. And this brings me to a point that I've been saying in this episode. Keep your head in hell, yes, face the reality of these Ukrainians, innocent Ukrainians, being killed. Face the reality that we're living in a world of lies. Well, I'm very clear that NATO is not just in this. to protect innocent Ukrainians. Because there are all kinds of innocent lives being threatened in conflicts across this planet and have been for decades now, that NATO was not invested in spending billions to protect those lives. No, Emmanuel Todd is right, it seems to me. If we want to understand this war, we need to look to existential causes involving arguably the very survival of the NATO, America, the West, its economic systems. We need to look to those kinds of things, which is not to deny that Russia is causing terrible, terrible suffering in the Ukraine. But enough of that for now. Maybe just a word on the Vatican. Because for Catholics, I think we need to face what is going on in the Vatican. I say this as a Catholic who can remember the reign of St. John Paul II and Benedict XVI, a time when at the highest levels of the church there was integrity. I'm aware that certain traditionalists will really criticize St. John Paul II, and at one level I understand that, because one can see mistakes that were made. In my view, these traditionalists never give the kind of credit that St. John Paul II deserves for keeping his head in hell and staring down the evil of the communist Russia. I recall I was long ago, I have a memory of being on a trad forum. In fact, I think it was Fish Eaters, that admirable effort by my friend Tracy Tuscherone. And I remarked that I thought St. John Paul II had more morality in his little finger than I have in my whole body. And I had the sense that that startled certain people, but I stand by that today. The last two popes were men of incredible courage, incredible morality, irreproachable integrity, beauty, goodness, the likes of which I am not capable of, whatever mistakes they may have made. But we are now faced with a Vatican that is not in the hands of that kind of level of integrity, and it is a real suffering for us as Catholics who love and care about what the Church is and what the tradition is, and do not want to see the Church transformed into a clone of Protestantism, or as I say, even worse, the secular liberal world. But what I've been raising in this whole podcast is the question of, it's all very well to say, keep your head in hell and do not despair. But how do you do this? How do you bear the vast, dark, toxic reality that is all around us? I haven't even begun to go into the aftermath of the virus because I'm not competent to do that. How do we bear this? And the short answer is we bear it with Christ. We trust the words of the gospel. I will not leave you orphans, and without me you can do nothing. And for a Catholic, that means communing with Christ in his sacraments. And I'm going to come back to my character Anna very briefly. In the course of the second book, it will be clear to the reader that Anna is becoming more and more and more of a mystic. She is going to Mass daily. She's obviously regularly in confession. And this is what I want to say to you, ladies and gentlemen. It may not be a happy year. I hope it can be a blessed year for you. Obviously, some of these things that I'm invoking about the world, about the situation of Ukrainian children and bloodshed, we're not going to be facing that. Many of my listeners in the American world and in the Western European world, but it's having repercussions for us as well. Many of us are now colder than we used to be, finding trouble affording things. This war is changing everything, and it doesn't seem for the better to me. How do we bear this? And of course, people have their terribly painful private tragedies going on all the time since the beginning of time. Which is why I'm not very happy with New Age books like A Course in Miracles telling us that this is all an illusion. How do we bear this? We bear this with Christ. And I want to say to you, ladies and gentlemen, if you're someone who's really struggling this year, nothing has helped me more in the bleakest and darkest and most painful periods of my life as a Catholic than going to Mass as frequently as possible. I encourage on this channel daily Mass, regular confession, because Christ is present. We come into greater communion with Christ through frequent and daily Eucharist, so that over time our flesh and blood is ennobled and transformed by His flesh and blood. In fact, just on a personal note, various circumstances have meant recently that I'm not able to get to Mass daily. Now, I hope this is a very temporary situation. I trust it's a very temporary situation. But I feel the difference. Whenever I'm cut off from the Mass, I feel the difference. Now, I'm not, completely cut off. I get to Mass 2 or 3 times a week at the moment. But the difference is profound. The first lockdown, I did fall into despair and depression. I fell into the worst despair that I've had in many, many years. And it was about sacramental deprivation. This is why, although I 100% believe in the Latin Mass, and I do consider the new Mass a catastrophe on the worldwide scale. It's not to say that there are not good priests celebrating the new Mass in a worthy way, but my experience of seeing this new Mass in many different countries that I've lived in confirms that this Mass, for me, I'm convicted of this, is a catastrophe. But despite the fact that I think that the new Mass amounts to a catastrophe seen at the global level, I can never support a kind of traditionalist attitude, or an attitude that exists in certain traditionalist circles that says we're only going to the Latin Mass because people who don't have a Latin Mass nearby will be discouraged from receiving the body and blood of Christ in their local chapel with the Novus Ordo. And some of those people desperately need this. I repeat, in the bleakest, darkest moments of my life, nothing has helped me more than daily Mass. And most of the time, that daily Mass, I had no other choice than the new Mass. And I think to St. Margaret Mary Alacoque, who beheld the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and our Lord said to her, "Go to communion, Holy Communion, as frequently as obedience allows," which meant, basically daily. And that injunction from the Sacred Heart has become a very key part of the spirituality that I wish to follow and which I wish to impart on this channel. So, when you have traditionalists saying abstain from the Mass, because it's not the old Mass, it seems to me they're saying abstain from communing with Christ. And there's something very, very tragic here, because not only do I believe that this miracle of Christ's body and blood becoming present, at least 100,000 times a day across all the altars of the world is, the miracle that's holding this planet together. Not only do I believe that, but, so far I'm speaking to you about how to bear this, how to bear your life if you're really, truly feeling the weight of the world or the weight of your own, private and personal tragedy. And I'm saying, Christ has said, bear it with me by coming to me. Bear it, I will not leave you orphans. Without me you can do nothing. Bear it by coming to me. Come to Christ in His sacraments. I want to say that not only do I want to counsel this in terms of bearing personal suffering, I want to say that if we want to create a Christian culture in the future on this planet, or lay down just the seed of a Christian culture, because in this time and epoch, we can do maybe no more than lay down the seed or preserve the seed of Christian culture, of Catholic culture, the seed of Christendom, preserving that seed. If that is what we want to fight for, and that is what I want to fight for, we need soldiers of Christ, and soldiers of Christ will be far more effective if they are being fed by Christ day in, day out, day in, day out, than if they're abstaining from the new Mass out of protest against the new Mass. Christ is present in the new Mass. As long as the words of the consecration aren't monkeyed around with, which very tragically they are sometimes, Christ is present in both Masses. But speaking of soldiers of Christ, speaking of preserving the seed of Christendom, I'd like to just come back a little bit to the topic of Catholic zombies back from the dead in France, because I do believe something is happening in France there. These intellectuals and sociologists that I'm looking at, like people like, Emmanuel Todd, incidentally, Emmanuel Todd is no fringe figure. He's a prestigious intellectual in France, maybe not unlike, Noam Chomsky in America. Piece I quoted before actually appeared in Le Figaro, which is a prestigious French newspaper. These people, it goes against their grain. They don't want to see Catholic zombies back from the dead in France, but they are seeing. They're seeing something that is at least different. I'm not saying that in France we see a mighty, mighty revival of the church yet. No, I'm not saying that. But I am saying that, I spoke about this in episode 22 and I think 32 as well. The globalism episode, it's not just about Ireland. It's called Globalism and the Irish Tragedy, but there's a lot about France there as well. Also episode 22. I went back to France for a couple of trips, stayed nearly 6 months there in all, and I really saw that something was different from when I lived in France before. I was really shocked by how even mainstream politicians were at least giving lip service to the church. I'm not saying there's, as I say, a mighty, unbelievable revival of the church in France, but I am saying that something is going on there that looks very different to the situation in Ireland or England or America. And this is again fits in with what I want to say about wanting to beg my listeners to try to read around as broadly as possible, because I know American Catholics or Irish Catholics that are understandably very distraught about the state of the church. And I am very concerned about the state of the church. But if you're listening to me, ladies and gentlemen, do I sound depressed to you? I'm strangely not depressed. And I think it has a great deal to do with daily communion with Christ. Again, I want to say that. But it also has to do, as far as I can see, with what I'm trying to encourage on this channel, which is trying to move out of groupthink, trying to look at other cultures. Something has been going on in France now for 50 years, in that the French led the way in preserving the Latin Mass. When I've lived in France, I've been told that you never had to go very far. You could find a Latin Mass always very near to you. A whole network of the Latin Mass has been built up in France, and I do consider that, and the culture around it, as very definitely, to say the least, part of this Catholic zombie phenomenon. We've gone into it before. We're not going to say a lot more now, but I just want to insert that now again as a seed of hope, because this seed of Christendom that the French, above all, I think, fought to preserve with their pioneering of the Latin Mass through the 70s, through the 80s, through the 90s, it's bearing fruit. And as I say, I want to fight for and preserve the seed of Christendom. And for me, I don't want to just go by what's happening in the Anglosphere. The church is a far greater phenomenon than just the Anglosphere. So yeah, I want to read as widely as I can, but I also need, above all, communion with our Lord, receiving his body and blood as frequently as possible, even if it means that I have to suffer the Novus Ordo. Even if it means that. What do you want? If you are going to be strengthened in Christ by receiving his body and blood frequently, daily, so that you can work for Christian culture in the world. That's the choice I've had to make over the years, really saying that's what I want to do, and I want Christ to fill me as much as possible. I mean, what can I say? I sometimes say on this channel that I have no hope for the world without the church. This plunge into materialism, this plunge into capitalism, this plunge into a soul-destroying culture that we have witnessed century after century after century. My only hope is the church, and by that I do not mean the church, the current cloning operation in the church that seeks to turn the church into a part of this world. No, I mean the real church. And that's what I, in my own modest way, am working for and struggling for, and I know I need communion with Christ for that, as frequently and as deeply as possible. And that has sometimes meant, suffering some very, very terrible liturgy to have communion with Christ. I sometimes think to myself that when I die, I'm going to see, I know I'm going to see how very, 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 very much I got wrong. But I also think that I will see the things that I got right, or at least that I got partially right. And one thing that I just feel confident that I got right was year after year after year of daily Mass. As I say, I'm having some problems now. I won't go into them, but they're temporary problems. To really keep my head in hell, to sort of face this world of war, of crime, of suffering, of horror, to not sort of go off into sort of feel-good New Age fantasies. I need Christ in his church. I need the power of the sacraments. I might add to that, I've been speaking a little bit in recent episodes how I've been in psychotherapy, and how that has had a value for me. I said in a recent episode it hasn't had anything like the value of the Catholic mystery, but it did have a value. But I see a world, a world cut off from the church, a world cut off from the sacraments, where more and more people go into therapy. And yet more and more people are going into therapy, and it seems to me the world is becoming more and more mad. In fact, I recall a book, we had it in our New Age library, the New Age Centre I ran once, called "We've Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World is Getting Worse." Interesting title. I'm not meaning to knock psychotherapy, but what I want to say is that if Christ has given us this way of the sacraments, if Christ has given us this way, and our culture turns away from the sacraments, then life becomes far harder to bear. We may need to turn to things like psychotherapy, or we may need to turn to things like New Age feel-good fantasies or Hollywood feel-good films to escape, because we can't bear to mourn and to weep. Again, blessed are those who mourn. But it takes strength, and strength comes from Christ in his church. Didn't know I was going to say all that. And I think I'm not going to say a lot more. This was meant to be a stopgap episode. It's turned out to be a little more than I intended. As I say, we have a couple of bigger episodes coming up. One very, very big indeed on the New Age. Hopefully I will be able to get those edited and together soon. And I will just close by saying that we have a few other things this year. I'm very much hoping that the website that I run, corjesussacritissimum.org, is going to be fully revamped. And that will allow me all kinds of possibilities. So watch this space for a new revamped website. You can actually look at the links down below. I will be announcing things there. I will also just mention that I mentioned in the last episode that I would be seeking some kind of fundraising through something like Patreon. For the moment, I've decided against Patreon, but you can now buy me a coffee if you should so feel inclined. There's links to that down below. There's also links to my author page at Amazon where you can buy me where you can buy my books. In fact, the cost of buying a book, at least a Kindle book, not the paper copies, is not necessarily much more than buying a coffee. So if you want, instead of buying me a coffee, you can buy one of my books and you will both help me, help my publisher, Angelico Press, and maybe give yourself a treat as well. So I'm end of those plugs. I just want to wish you again, ladies and gentlemen, a very blessed year. It won't necessarily be a happy year, but by cleaving to Christ in his church, we can be assured of a blessed year. That's all I'm going to say for now, friends. God bless you, and take care.